All right, so we're back. So let's do a quick review. So let's start with the four worlds. Because remember how I just said a moment ago, fire becomes water, water becomes air, air becomes earth. That's the four worlds. So absolute, which is primordial fire. Fire is action. It's the motivating force. And then what happens is that comes down into the Bryotic plane where it manifests as the primordial force, which then mates with the primordial feminine, primordial father, mother. So actually, one of the ways that we do this in my Kabbalah garden on the land is here is the signs of the zodiac. It's the one. It's everything. And then when we do an emanation in the garden, we all start at Keter and we stand there. And then we go Yod, that's fire, the letter for fire, Yod. Yod, think of it as the primordial sperm, so to speak. And then we go He, which is the letter of water. And we split and we walk down. The men go to here, the women go to here. Then we turn and face each other. He, the feminine and the masculine. The Tao becomes the yang and the yin. The yang and the yin. The primordial force meets the primordial form. And this gives birth to Saturn, the underlying idea of form. So we start with unity. We have the primordial force, which then grounds itself, seeds the primordial form. Think of the act of conception. Unity gives birth to this impulse to act, which then inseminates the primordial feminine, which gives birth to the first form. But it's simply an idea of form. Then, that's the second world, fire. Inseminates water, water, the ultimate receptive element. Force in form. That in turn, fire and water, what happens? Steam, air. What happens when you heat water? Steam. And now this steam goes through all these planets taking on various configurations. This is air. And it finally, what does it do? It condenses into earth. Beautiful metaphor, isn't it? Fire heats water, gives birth to air. Air condenses into the solid form of earth. That is how fire gives birth to water. And so you want to always remember this order. In the same way, although it's a lot right now to memorize, if you memorize this pattern, so this is what we call the path of the serpent. This is the way energy descends from pure spirit to pure matter. Okay? If you follow the path of the serpent, you're zigzagging across the tree. Now what's interesting, if you memorize this pattern, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon, if you memorize that order, you will find it over and over and over again in every metaphysical system. It's just really funny. So that's a really, really interesting thing. That order is very important. You don't need to know it probably for this, but I would just tell you that. If you're going to study anything metaphysical, learn that order, you'll never regret it. You know, because it shows up over and over again. So for example, it shows up in the hexagram. Okay? So the hexagram, there are all those points, right? And here's how it works. This descends to the abyss, and we have Saturn, right? Which then goes to the next point, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon. So if anybody ever asks you what points are associated with what planet on a hexagram, you now know. That's just an example. If we were to think about this as, well, you can think about it, you can make endless models. Let's say we start with the model of how you come to do something. So you start off and you're in a state of absolute potential. Not doing anything, not thinking about anything. And then you feel an impulse to create. I want to create something. I feel like doing something. Then you come up with an idea. I think I'd like to create a mystery school. Then the next thing I have to do is I have to create a structure. Well, what would a mystery school look like? Who would run it? Who would the students be? How would we do it? That would be Hased. Then I would come over to here and then I would go, okay, well, I got that structure, but what doesn't fit in this? And wait a minute, maybe this is going to be this is overly structured. I need to shake some things up, put some new ideas in, change it a little bit. Then, having done all that, I come to okay, now I think I've got it together. And I feel comfortable with this. I'm ready to move forward. Another way of looking at it is you might move here and go, yeah, I really want to have this mystery school. You feel the impulse to build it, to create it, to make it happen, and then you go over here and you feel your resistance. It's going to be a lot of weekends. Do I really want to do that? Oh my God, here I go again. And then you get to a point where you're like, okay, this is going to work. I can live with this. This is going to be fun. I want to do it. Then, wow, I'm really getting excited. I have a whole sense of emotional attachment to my idea. I really want to make it happen. And here's how I'm going to do it. And then the plan is in place and it starts in the spring. We hope. But anyway, you see what I mean? You can do that with a stage of life. You can talk about, we all go through these stages all the time, right? And so when these cards show up, here's the stage that we're talking about. And now let's apply it to one of these 4 suits. Is it really about my physical reality? Is it about my emotional reality? Is it about my thoughts? Is it about my actions? Right? So that would be the thing to think about. And that's that's where we get the Lesser Arcana. This is where we get with it. Let's also go on and talk about, and there's that alternation of forces too. So when you're reading these too, you want to also think about how the number fits with the particular suit. So for example, if you have the number 4, the 4th being about stability, about building up, and you have the 2 more mobile suits, air and water, it might not be as happy appearing. On the other hand, if it's like earth, which is all about stability, that might be good, or it could be rather too much of a good thing. Right? So you're going to think about that. You're going to think about the number itself, what sphere it represents, and then you're going to apply it to the particular suit, and then you're going to think about whether or not that's a good pairing, the good and the bad of it, and then you're going to look at the context of the reading to determine whether or not that seems like a good thing to be in that place. And then of course we'll learn about that too. So that's where the beauty of it all comes in. So that's kind of all of that. Now, do you all feel pretty at home with this? That is another thing I should say, as long as I'm in the broader context of Tarot as a whole. There are some funny decks where people switch the attributions in terms of elements. So they call wands, they attribute wands to air and swords to fire, which is just, in my opinion, flat out goofy. But you just got to know that when you work with these variant decks, which is why I'd say start with one of the more mainstream, and you're less likely to get confused or in trouble.
The ones we got, the Rider-Waite tarot
Yeah.
deck.
Yeah.
Is this?
That's it.
This is a good one.
Oh yeah, it's an excellent deck. You won't go wrong with that. By the way, one of the things that's really cool is the Rider-Waite deck has now made it into public domain. You can actually download the deck. Yeah. Well, it's been around for a long time, and it's just become You know, everybody likes them because and actually, if you look at this first page, it even talks about it a little. It says, the Rider-Waite Tarot deck has been vastly influential in the development of later divinatory tarot decks to the extent that many are called Rider-Waite clones. So, for example, the Morgan Greer is really a Rider-Waite clone, to indicate that they are easily read by those familiar with Rider-Waite. Examples of Rider-Waite clones, some arguably so, include the Universal Waite Tarot deck, Golden Tarot, Aquarian Tarot, Nigel Jackson Tarot, Gilded Tarot, Golden Rider, and many more. So, this deck has also influenced the terminology used by English-speaking tarot users, such as that English translations of traditional French or Italian decks often use the nomenclature of the Rider-Waite deck, even when the traditional decks predate it. So, yeah, some of the French and Italian decks, like the Visconti Tarot, is very old. It's a fun one. But this is really where you want to start, I think. All right. You are already on your way to being astrologers. Why is that? Well, first of all, you know a little bit about the planets already, don't you? You also know something about the 4 elements. Well, astrology is a combination of planets and 4 elements. So there you go. So you already know stuff. How's that? So let's start. And we're going to talk about fire. Okay, and that is the suit of wands, right? And in that we have a triplicity. Triplicity meaning we have cardinal fire or beginning fire. We have fixed, also sometimes called cherubic. And we have mutable. And we have the cardinal fire, we know is the king. So the king of wands is cardinal fire. Cardinal fire, beginning fire. Cardinal signs are always associated with the solstices and the equinoxes. That's just a quick way to remember them. So the spring equinox, beginning fire, is Aries. You remember in Chaucer, he talks about Aries the ram? Anyway, so here we are, Aries. So if you look at that, what is Aries? Aries is I am. It's active, enthusiastic, the pioneer, wants to be first, begins things he doesn't always finish. Another way of looking at this, though, is kings are fire, right? So it's fire of fire. Fire, what would that tell us, fire of fire? Well, it tells us that this person has a lot of energy and they might be a little bit overbearing at times, right? This is the pioneer. This is and Arians are very determined and they are just going to sweep everybody along with them and say, come on, let's go, you know? They're the get up and go guys. So that would be, so you could think about the King of Wands is if it shows up in relationship to a person. So sometimes these come up in a reading and you think, oh, like it's coming into the incoming influence or it's sitting in the environment position and you say, oh, so some kind of fiery person is really going to come into your life and they're going to have they're going to really light a fire under your butt and they're going to be, or they're going to be really opposing you or whatever, depending on the context, right? So you could see it as a person, and it would be a person who had these qualities, male or female, right? Or you could actually, this is a dummy method, but sometimes it actually does turn out this way, where you really sort of feel like it is like an actual person who's a man, and who's like, just like you'll say, kind of like, I bet he's a fire sign, I bet he's a fire sign, oh, you're going to meet a guy and he's going to be one hot tamale. So that would be King of Wands, right? And then we have fixed fire, which we know is the Queen's. Queen of Wands. And that's also, whoops, Queen of Wands, oh dear. My spelling is just disintegrating. That would also be water of fire. So once again, it's fiery, but it's a more feminine fiery. It's a more sensuous, flowing fiery. And that's a Leo, all right. Leos are, leonine, right? They're very, and if you look at that, going down to Leo, which is, it says, I will. The second sign in the fire triplicity. It's the second fixed sign. These people are ardent, enthusiastic, resolute, self-reliant, dramatic, hardy, loyal, creative. The father could also be the gambler, or the actor, or the artist. Leos love to be on center stage. So Arians, which is beginning fire, is all about I am. It's like really about this self-expression. I am all about. And Leos are about I will. Let's make that happen. And then we have mutable fire. So the Queen of Wands is, that's a really intense card. I always think of that card as the sorceress. If I'm thinking about it as an actual woman, it's like the sorceress. She makes stuff happen. And she's very seductive. She's very powerful. And then you have mutable, which would be our knight, or in some decks it would be called a prince. And that would be air of fire. So now we have that fiery quality, but it's very intellectual, and but also air moves fast. So one of the things that's interesting is I love looking at the knights in the Rider deck, because actually, let's play with that for a moment. That's mutable. So let me finish this first. So the Knight of Wands, and it's Sagittarius. It's mutable fire. Now Sagittarians they love to wander. They love it because that's like air. They love to travel. They're full of a lot of energy. They're often very rambunctious. They're party animals. I love Sagittarius. I have a Sagittarius moon. So if you look at that, the third sign in the fire triplicity, the third mutable sign, enthusiastic, zealous, devout, diversified, flexible, loves animals, the sportsman or the hunter, the philosopher, the minister, the traveler. Whatever he does, he throws himself into it with enthusiasm. All right, here's a fun thing. Let's look at the minor arcana and talk about the four suits for just a moment. So the first suit is Wands. There's our Knight of Wands. Do you see him? One of the things that I always think is really funny about the Rider-Waite deck is the horses give you a clue. So here's our Knight of Wands, mutable fire. This guy is ready to take on the world. That's his fire, right? And there's a kind of muscularity to that horse and a lot of bounding energy, right? That would be mutable fire, air of fire. There's a sense of, and then let's turn to the next one, Knight of Pentacles. Now we have mutable earth. Well, that guy's on a Percheron or a Clydesdale or something. That's a big, big horse. And it's not going anywhere fast, but I bet it gets there, right? That guy's gonna get where he's going. And that's Virgo, by the way, that's my card. So, yeah, steady. So it's air, so the vision is there, it's mutable, but it's earth. Practical, down to earth, gonna get there. Now let's go to the next one, which is the Knight of Cups. Now we have mutable water, and we have it's air of water. So we have this intellectually driven process, but it's all about the inner realm of vision and emotions and intuition. This is Galahad. And he looks kind of dreamy, and he has that really pretty horse, and he really looks like just very dreamy, right? Graceful, gorgeous, So it's about beautiful ideas. But that's a visionary. Yeah, I always think of that as the card of Galahad. He was the guy who found the Holy Grail. Now, let's look at our final guy, which is Heir of Air, or Mutable Air. Holy cow, that guy's going fast. He's charging over the horizon. And the thing about that guy is you kind of wonder if he's going to just charge right off the page. All right? So you see how it works? But I think the knights are particularly good in this deck because they just exemplify it beautifully. The way that the energy shifts according to the suit, right? So there's our mutable fire. So there we have our fire, right? All right, let's buzz through quickly the rest. So that's fire. Let's do water. So we have cups, which is water. Again, let's remember our downward pointing pentagrams, or triangles rather. And then we have the King of Cups is cardinal, right? And it's going to be fire of water. All right, and that would be, so that's cardinal water. And that would be Cancer. Again, Cancer, right around the summer solstice, right? And what you have there is fire of water. So you have, it's about emotions, but it's a very energized, intense emotion. Cancers are intense. They are very active in the emotional realm. Then we have the Queen of Cups. Now this is water of water. And this is cherubic, or fixed water. And what do we get there? Well, water of water that's a lot of emotionality and vision. So if you look at the Queen of Cups, you'll see a woman gazing into the Grail. And so, again, it can be rather a lot of the same thing. So, Queen of Cups is often the artist. These are people, male or female, who are very, very visionary. And it's Scorpio. Scorpios are deep. They're very inward. And again, if we look at that, so if we go back to our mini sketches of the signs, so we have the water triplicity. The first one is Cancer. It's I feel. Sensitive, emotional, intuitive, changing, sheltering, protective, tenacious. The mother, but also could be the father. And then you have fixed, which is going to be Scorpio. Second sign in the water triplicity. This is our Queen of Cups. Emotional, receptive, sensitive, persistent, determined, intense, penetrating, resourceful, magnetic. The detective, the alchemist, I desire. Often deep visionaries. And then we get to our third one, which is the Knight of Cups. We just talked about that, so I'm going to just skim over that. But that's mutable water. It's Galahad, as I talked about him. But mutable water, of course, is Pisces. And that would be sensitive, emotional, intuitive, changeable, vacillating, idealistic, visionary, the dancer, poet, or artist, art for art's sake, doesn't like to compete, the mystic. Keyword is I believe. So hopefully these little sketches will help you. All right, let's go on to our third one. So now we are going to go on to swords. And we have the King of Swords. which is gonna be fire of air. So this is a very, air is about mind, but this is a very decisive mind. Often I think of this as the judge. It's where when you combine that intellectual quality with that leadership and intensity of fire. And so it's fire of air. And of course it's cardinal air, which would be Libra, and which is often, again, the symbol is the balancing scale. So you could see there again that notion of the judgment. And let's see, where is it? Oh. Yeah, so it's the cardinal sign. Sprightly, impersonal, leading, outgoing. So that's the fiery part, the outgoing, and the leading. But the impersonal is more the air part. Fond of beauty, luxury, society, justice, art, music, poetry, languages. The mediator, I balance. So that's our King of Swords. The Queen of Swords. She'll change your life. My husband is very fond of this card because he always associates it with me. And right before we met, that was where that phrase came from. A young woman was doing, 2 days before he met me, a young woman flew through the cards for him, and that card came up and she said, the Queen of Swords, she'll change your life. And she predicted that he was going to meet me, so. And this is water of air. The way I always think about this card is I think about it as the Red Queen. Off with their heads! Off with their heads! But that's like the negative side. But really, and in many decks, actually, I think the case deck shows the queen holding her sword up in one hand and a severed head in the other. And what it's about is, this is your fish or cut bait card. This is like where, okay, enough already. You cut away what is unnecessary. It's having the emotional strength to just say, that doesn't work. I'm getting rid of it. And this card comes up a lot of times when people are pruning bad relationships and things like that out of their life, that's probably, well, never mind. Okay.
What sign was associated?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry. So this would be fixed air, and fixed air, which would be, my brain just went dead. Somebody help me out here. Aquarius, thank you. Oh, yes. Aquarius. Interesting, I would blip on that. So Aquarians really, like I said, they really march to their own beat. And they're mental, impersonal. They can be a bit impersonal, determined, self-reliant, independent. The sociologist with his mind on humanity's problems. The absent-minded professor or scientist with his mind on an abstract problem. The metaphysician. I know is the key word. And yeah, the thing about that's what makes them a little bit seemingly harsh sometimes is they really know what needs to be done, and they're not afraid to break eggs to make that omelet, And yeah, that's me sometimes. All right, and then finally we have the Knight of Swords. And this is air of air, rather a bit much of a good thing. That's the guy that we were just looking at, charging off over the horizon. And this is mutable air, Gemini. And let's see, where is that on this thing? This is in the oddest order for some reason. There we go. Gemini, first mutable sign. It's mental, changeable, versatile, dual. The twins, the communicator, I think. So this is all about thought. Often very quick. Like if this card comes up to indicate kind of what's going on, activating within you, I would say, wow, a lot of ideas streaming through there, probably at the speed of sound. So, hang on. Hold your horses, Nellie, because you're on for a ride. And sometimes I feel like that, All right. So then we get to our final suit, which is Pentacles. I know this is really fast. Is this helping though to kind of nail it down? All right. So now we have Earth. And we have the King of Pentacles. I'm just gonna do this rather than write it. Oh, that's not right, sorry. I must be tired. The King of Pentacles, and that would be Fire of Earth. The businessman, I always think of this card. Fire has a lot of ability, a lot of drive, and when you combine it with Earth, you get the ability to manifest. Boy, King of Pentacles is about big manifestation. Cardinal Earth, Capricorn, the businessman. And where is that in this thing? Should be down there. Yeah, third sign of the Earth triplicity, fourth cardinal sign. Practical, active, leading, inaugurating, ambitious, stubborn, you bet. It's hard to knock over the King of Pentacles. The engineer who builds dams, the politician who doesn't give one, the executive who knows how to use people most efficiently. The keyword, I use. Great manifestors. The Queen of Pentacles, on the other hand, is water of earth. And this is the nurturing earth mama. And that's a fixed earth, which would be Taurus. And let's see, where's Taurus on this thing? Second one. Yeah, practical, physical, stable, self-reliant, the builder, finisher, likes possessions, is determined. Keyword is I have. Yeah, you see both of these are earth, manifestation. And Taurians often create lots of beauty, lots of luxury. They have lovely, they're the kind of houses I always envy. You go in and, oh, it looks so pretty and so comfy, and they have all those nice pillows and, yeah, it's really nice. But anyway, so that would be the Queen of Pentacles. So it's water of earth. So it's this ability to manifest that's very warm, very emotional, very luxurious. And then we have the Knight of Pentacles. We've talked about him. That's the guy, slow and steady, wins the race. And that is air of earth. So you have, that's a kind of a nice combination because it's all about manifestation, but there's a good, steady thought process directing it. And that would be mutable earth. That's Virgo. That would be me. So Virgos are indeed very practical. And they're practical, flexible, earthy, diversified, analytical. Likes details, writing, science, mechanics, music, mathematics, chemistry, the scientist. All right, we did it, you guys. We buzzed through. So books, here's a couple of thoughts. If you want some basic Kabbalah stuff, then I would recommend Jeff Love's Quantum Gods. And it's an absolutely really fun, very modern, brilliantly written take on Kabbalah. And even if you only read the first half, you get a lot out of it. And you can get it in paper, I believe, at Amazon. The other one that I recommend as a good starting point is Dion Fortune, The Mystical Kabbalah. That's kind of a classic, quite readable. And I think it's just, reading about Kabbalah is just one of those things that once you start, you never stop because it's such a fascinating subject. So that would be a good thing. Another thing that you can think about,
excuse me, what was the first book you mentioned?
The Quantum Gods by Jeff Love. Brilliant book. The other thing that I think would be worth a read maybe is if you want to read further on Tarot just to jog your memory. Like I said, I like Aleister Crowley. It's called the Book of Thoth, Thoth. I like the Lesser Arcana. His take on the majors, no. But I like his take on the Lesser Arcana. And then a really great little resource book for the majors is Bill Butler's Dictionary of the Tarot. And what's really just great about that book is that he takes all the kind of leading luminaries, people who have written or talked about tarot, and he gives you a little thumbnail of what they say. So it's kind of cool because you can see on one page, you can compare the ideas of 10 or 12 main authors on the trumps. So that's a good book to get.
What was that author's name again for our dictionary?
William Butler, B-U-T-L-E-R. Actually, Bill Butler was my initiator's initiator, so it's my lineage. So anyway, that's really worth looking at. So hopefully, though, when you get out of this class, you will pretty much be able to just rock and roll. If you want just like a quick reference guide, there's always the book that goes with the Rider-Waite deck. It's kind of underwhelming, but it works. And that's that. So let's go back. So what I want to do now is I want to go in a systematic way through the lesser arcana. All right, so let's start with the aces, because we're going to have to really move here. So the aces,
Are you reading from that or not?
No.
Just the card.
yeah. So what we have is Keter, right? The sphere at the top of the tree. I should probably draw it again. I didn't think I was going to use this board. Ha ha. I don't know why I ever thought I could get away without using the board. That's the abyss. All right. So here's Keter at the top of the tree. And these are our aces. And this represents pure potential. So there what we have to do is we have to compare the aces. So if you look, for example, at the Ace of Wands, you see that? You see the hand coming out of the cloud, holding this wand with yuds coming off it. Yuds are like sparks of energy, you could think of it. And then if you go down to the cups, you see the hand holding what's clearly the Grail, right? And you see, this is an image of the Paraclete, the descent of spirit. So you have, it's a Pentecostal image, it's very Christian, this card, where you see the dove descending, carrying the Eucharist, so to speak. And then you see the overflowing of the cup into the great waters of the unconscious. And then you have Ace of Pentacles, which is a hand holding the disc with the countryside below it. That's probably the least evocative of those images, I would say. And then the Ace of Swords, holding the sword upright. Again, you see yuds. And you see a crown with the victor's wreath above it. All right, so let's talk about that. So Ace of Wands represents the potential for tremendous activity. And that's why yuds is such a good symbol, because you have that, it's like the ability to just make almost anything happen. That's what fire, that's the potential to make almost anything happen. And there are many things, if you look at that, it's a wand that has burst into bloom. And this is also, this icon goes back to many things. Among them, Glastonbury in England, where there's a tale of how the Fisher King, also Joseph, in various tales, it's Joseph of Arimathea. Supposedly, after the death of Jesus, Joseph of Arimathea had the cup from the Last Supper, and he was guided by spirits to take the followers of Jesus who were being persecuted, and they went down to the sea. And he was told to take his cloak off and cast it upon the waters, which he did, and it became solid. And so everybody walked onto it carrying, by the way, the round table, which was the table from the Last Supper. So you see, this is how a lot of Arthurian myth began. And they placed the Grail on the round table, and then they sailed on this raft across the sea. And what happened was they went for a long period of time, and during that time they were fed from the Grail. so he was able to draw fishes and wine, and they all were fed from this magical cup sitting at this round table on this incredible raft. And he had a staff. When they finally came to the shores of England and they came into the Vale where Glastonbury was, he was directed once again to take his followers, and they carried the table and the cup, and they went up to the place of the Vale of Glastonbury, where he was told to plant his staff, and it burst into bloom and became the great thorn of Glastonbury. So this is a very profound myth, and that's what that image is referring to. It's this incredible potential vitality and life force. When that shows up, it tells you that the person has the ability to make the dead wood burst into life. It's the life force, the viriditas, the green force, that energy. And so the Ace of Wands is about tremendous potential creative force. The Ace of Cups is the Grail. And this is about inspiration. And there you have again, a doubling of images. You have the image of the Holy Grail. You have the image of the dove, which is, do you remember the story about how after Jesus had died, the apostles were very frightened, and they were all in the upper room above this inn, kind of huddled together, terrified. And what happened was the Holy Spirit, in the form of the dove, descended, and they had this mystical Eucharist in which they then went out and began speaking in tongues, and everyone, regardless of their language, was able to understand them. So it's a sort of the reverse of the tower, right? So this is about tremendous potential for receptivity, water being receptivity, being simply overwhelmed by an inflowing of spirit and vision. And sometimes, in fact, it is overwhelming. It can overwhelm the intellect, which is why glossolalia occurs. Glossolalia, speaking in tongues, And if you look at the picture, you also see this image of the waters spilling from the Grail down into the waters below. And that is an image for the spilling over of this great spiritual inspiration into the unconscious mind. The waters below being the unconscious mind, and the overflowing of the cup being the overflowing of this upwelling spirit. So the Ace of Cups is about the potential to receive and to take in direct spiritual experience on a profound, deep level. And of course, if you were to look at it, if both of these cards again, and you thought about it as a negativity, these cards can have a negative meaning. One of the things that you can say certainly is that, well, with the Ace of Wands, tremendous ability to create is present here, but it lacks focus, right? Or you could say with the Ace of Cups, well, you have a tremendous amount of inflowing spiritual force, but it's overflowing. It's simply overwhelming you. That would be a possible negative interpretation. Doesn't happen so much, but because generally potential is potential, it's just that. It's neither positive nor negative. It's potential, right? But then if we look at the Ace of Pentacles and the Ace of Swords, which are our two secondary elements, with the Ace of Pentacles, what we see is the potential for manifestation. This is perhaps slightly less positive than the other two. Why is that? Well, fire and water are both primordial elements. In their potential form, it's a very rich thing. But when we look at manifestation, we don't like potential so much. We want to see a little more stuff actually happening, right? But nonetheless, the Ace of Pentacles represents the ability, if it comes up, so let's say somebody is going, well, what about this job I'm thinking about taking? Is this going to be a good job? And you get you get the Ace of Pentacles, you could say, well, what this indicates is there's definitely potential. There's a potential for you to do very well in this job, to make a lot of money, to be very successful. However, you're going to have to find a way to focus it, right? And so that's is how we would look at that one. And there again, what you see is in the background, beneath this pentacle that's being cradled in the hand, you see this sort of archway leading into a garden. And so what the idea there is that, you know, there's the potential here for, you know, coming home to paradise, so to speak. But at the same time, one has to actually make it happen. And then finally we have the Ace of Swords. And what you see there is, this calls up a couple of things. When you see crowns in the tarot or in any of these iconography, there are several meanings that immediately occur. One, of course, this is the victor's crown because it's got laurel. It's wreathed in laurel. So this is the victor's crown. But what this is about is establish high thy mind. That best of charioteers. That's a phrase from the Golden Verses of Pythagoras, which is one of the main Hermetic texts. But at any rate, what you're seeing there is this idea that there is a tremendous creative force in the intellect, which can lead one, you know, to real illumination. So there is a great potential here for being able to bring into being new thoughts, new understandings, things that can in fact lead one to a great victory. There again, as always, the issue is, can you bring it into focus? You know, if the sword actually can, you know, if the thought can be channeled into a clear enough form, then indeed it can bring victory. But if not, it's empty. So what you're looking at with the positive and the negative, there is in all of them there is a difficulty inherent in their being aces, which is that they are potential. So there is a necessity. So that's like the carrot. It's like, wow, this really good thing could happen, but you have to find a way to bring it into being. On the other hand, you know, when you see these in the context of wondering whether or not something is a good road to go down, it's usually a pretty positive indication. It's an indication that there's definitely a lot of potential. Let's go on to the twos. So what we have now are the twos, and with twos, you remember, are about the beginning impulse. It's things in the beginning. And so what you think is this is pretty early on in his suit. So there's always a sense of the energy is just commencing at this point. And you're feeling the urge. So if you look at the Two of Wands, which is on that first page, this card, the picture here, this is various, like something depending on my mood, I like this card or not so much. But the idea there is that one is feeling the impulse to go out and do something. And it's often called the card of Alexander. And the reason is that what do you think of when you think of Alexander the Great? Well, that was the guy who conquered the whole world, right? And so, you know, at some point, you know, Alexander was one of those people in history who, you know, periodically just said, well, let's go conquer India, you know, or gee, you know, how about taking Afghanistan? And off he went, you know. And so the Two of Wands is about where you actually feel the impulse to really move toward action. And I love the way that the figure is holding an orb. So there's a sense of, it's like, I want to make my mark upon the world. That's very much what this card is about. When you feel that, it's the impulse to act, to express. Fire is about expression. Fire is about creativity. And so this is about, okay, let's go out there and do something. And that's what happens with the twos in general. When you come down to the Two of Cups, this is a card, you see the two figures holding the cups, and there's this sort of strange looking, well, there's a caduceus, which is the wand of Mercury, right, behind the cups, and over that this sort of winged lion kind of figure. And what this is about is when that impulse to act moves into the suit of water. And there are two ways of looking at this card, and I think it's important to remind yourself of this, because typically what people do is they say, oh, this is a card about beginning a new relationship or feeling like you want to be in relationship, because it's two people looking at each other holding cups, right? It makes sense. And I think that's true. But it's also on a deeper level about the desire to know oneself. It's the, remember how twos, when I talked about, it's the experience of God looking at himself in his own reflection. That's, Keter reflecting down into Chokmah. And that becomes the logos. It becomes the basis for an act. Well, that's also what this is about here. It's about one's ability, one's desire to know oneself, to become in a deeper and more profound relationship to oneself. And so you can read this card one of two ways. You can think about it as being about the impulse to connect to others or an other, or you can think about it as the exploration of the self, to know one's shadow self, to know one's deepest self. Or you could think about it in that really Jungian context where we think about, the union of the two opposites. So there's a certain point in midlife where this card often comes up for men and women. And what happens in midlife is that men suddenly begin to experience a profound desire to connect with their own feminine essence, to become deeper emotionally. Women, on the other hand, tend to want to connect more with our more masculine self. And it's sort of awful in a way, because sometimes, you look at marriage and it's like people have been toddling along for, years, and then they hit mid-years and suddenly the guy is like wanting to really experience deep, passionate connection, and the wife is like, forget that already. I asked for that for 20 years. Now I want to go have a career.
In my little red car.
And what exactly? And what was that crazy movie? Don Juan de Marcos. Do you remember that? Any of you see that movie? If you haven't, you should watch it. It's Johnny Depp at his best, and he plays Don Juan. But it's funny because this is a young man who has a Don Juan complex, and his therapist is Marlon Brando, and Marlon Brando's wife is Faye Dunaway. And there's this moment where Marlon Brando is getting so inspired and touched by the extraordinary passion of this young man that he's sort of waking up and realizing, yeah, I want some of that. So he turns to his wife, because he's a good guy, right? And he says, what do you really want? And she looks at him and she said, I've waited so many years for you to ask me that. Why are you asking me now? And I thought, the Two of Cups. Oh, it's a funny card.
And also the Mercury could be like Gemini.
Well, right. Well, Mercury, what that caduceus is, the interweaving of the two streams, has to do with the interweaving of the yin and the yang, of Ida and Pingala. This is actually, the caduceus is actually basically a symbol for the human being. The center staff being the spine. The two streams of energy that flow up either side of the spine are Ida and Pingala, they're called, and the central spine is called Sushumna. This is Vedic, of course. And it's the idea of, it's the Kundalini. And so that's a really interesting thing, is that. So yes, it's about the union of opposites, either within the self or in the externalized. Because what are we doing when we fall in love with another person? We're really falling in love with a projection of our own self. If you fall in love with a woman, you are projecting your anima upon her. If you fall in love with a man, you are projecting your animus upon him. That's a very Jungian way of looking at it. But that's one of the ways we know we come to know ourselves, is through loving others, curiously enough.
What does that lion represent?
The lion, it's a cherubim. It's a cherubim, which cherubim are associated with, again, shining. The name cherub means shining, glittering. It's a huge force. So this is about, and it's red, which is sexuality in Mars. So what you have here is an opening up, the impulse to begin to explore and to open and to deepen. And then we move to the Two of Pentacles. I love this card. The Juggler. So the Two of Pentacles is, again, a bit more practical. It's the impulse to kind of pick up stuff and start to mess with it. So, which is why I love it. It's an infinity symbol with these two pentacles, and there's a sense of that he's trying to juggle. And that's what we do when we begin to work in the realm of manifestation, is we have to learn balance. This card is all about balance. So it's about balancing the two poles or the two opposites. So if the two is about the union of the opposites within the realm of the emotional or the internal, the Two of Pentacles is about the balancing of opposites in the external world, right? Whereas the Two of Wands is about I and thou, or me and it. I want to act upon something, right? Do you see that? How that progresses? So the Two of Pentacles is again about, and what's interesting is you see waves behind that figure, that juggler. And you see him standing on the shore with the sea behind him, but it's not a flat sea, it's a wavy sea. And so this is again about the idea that you kind of got to surf. You have to be able to go and roll. And so in beginning to work with matter, there's always the struggle between balancing opposites. And that's in fact true for us when we're born, if you think about it for a moment. Two of Pentacles is also about early childhood or infancy, where there you are trying to figure out how this crazy machine that we call our body works. How do I operate that hand? You ever watch a really little baby when, you know, they're, I don't know, must be 5 or 6 months, and you put something like peas on their tray, and they do this. They pick it up, they put it down. They pick it up, they put it down. They're trying to operate their hand. They're trying to figure out how does this thing work.
Tape's better.
Yeah. Oh yeah, right.
Understand.
Oh yeah.
That's right.
Well, I remember the time my sister wrapped my brother in an entire roll of tape. Head to toe. And we all wondered why he turned out so weird. Well, anyway, and then we go down to the Two of Swords. This is a beautiful icon. This is an example of what I meant when I said, you know, how one suit emerges out of another. So swords emerges out of water, right? Remember how we talked about that? It's fire, then water, then air, then earth. Well, here we are in the beginning of air. And what's behind that figure? Water. Now, this is elegant. This is a really elegant card because I like this image a lot. Because the idea is the Two of Swords is the first impulse to put something into thought. How does that happen? Well, you have a whole lot of unconscious knowing or intuiting. That's represented by the water behind the figure. The figure is blindfolded. So when we first are allowing something to arise up from the depths of our being, we do it by feel. Right? And the figure holds the swords in equipoise and is feeling one's way toward the thought. Actually sort of feeling one's way and shutting out everything else in order to allow it to arise. But it arises from where? It arises from the water. And there's the closing off of the other senses, the closing off of the eyes, is all about this fact that when we first feel the stirrings of a thought, we have to kind of step back and allow it to emerge. So this is a very germinal place. When one is in this Two of Swords place, one is just feeling the first stirrings of a concept. But you can't try to grab it too hard, right? If you grab it too hard, you lose it. Have you ever had that happen? You just feel like that great idea, and you try to grab it, it falls away, and then it's like, phooey, what was that? So the Two of Swords, and so there again, there's a sense, you notice that in all the twos, there's some sort of equipoise going on, right? But in the Two of Swords, it's an internal equipoise. It's being able to quiet both the mind and the unconscious, so that out of that still reflection the thought rises and takes wing. So that's a broad sense of the cards. It's beautiful, isn't it? When you begin to look at it that way. Now, let's think about them in positive and negative for a moment. So the positive of the Two of Wands is that one is feeling creative. One is feeling the desire to act upon the world, to express, to create, to make something happen. That's a good thing. But there is a negative that's implied in it as well. And that is sometimes it comes through a process of objectification. So you begin to act upon the world as an it. This is unfortunately what has happened with nature. Our relationship to nature, we have objectified nature. We do things to nature. We act upon nature rather than creating within the context of nature, right? And so whether it's, however that creative impulse is turned outward, the danger of the Two of Wands is the objectification of the other. Okay? There's me and there's not me. And you don't want to, if you objectify not me, then you act upon it. And that is a problem. That's a problem. Does that make sense? All right. Let's look at the Two of Cups. The Two of Cups, again, is about this joining or discovery of self, the exploration of self through relationship, whether it's through a deepened relationship to the self or through a relationship to others. It can go, it doesn't matter so much. But it's through this sense of relationship. And of course, one of the tricky things about this card is that because it is so much about beginnings, there is a way where one can lose oneself, right? And so that can be a negative thing there too, where one becomes fixated upon the other. And, so if you're talking about it internally, in terms of your own internal life, there's a way where you can become so fixated on this pursuit of your own self and this other part of yourself that you allow some other parts of your being to languish. You ignore them. You stop paying attention to, taking care, right? Or in relationships, we all know that thing that happens when people get into beginning relationships, and it's particularly annoying sometimes for their closest friends, because suddenly your dearest and most intimate friend vanishes. And it's like they've fallen down a rabbit hole, and God help you, they may not reappear for a year or two. I always found that rather annoying. But, well, it's true. Just, made me crazy. So that's the downside there. Two of Pentacles. Well, the problem there is just simply, the negative there is you can start dropping balls. You ever have one of those days? I have them all the time, where I have about 7 balls in the air and suddenly it's thunk thunk. They start falling around me. So there's that, where, you're trying to do this balancing act, but it's new and you're clumsy at it. And so that's just about learning curves, right? The negative on this one is mostly about learning curves. It's about trying to find that right balance between, how do you keep it all up in the air at once? I think that one is an easy one to understand, because I think we all experience it almost daily, right? Two of Swords. The negative on this one is that one can allow an idea to arise, but without really being able to bring it sharply enough into focus. You either get lost in the unconscious, and so or worse still, you don't understand the unconscious basis of the thought. That's a problem. So a thought arises, but you don't really understand the unconscious basis of the thought, and so sometimes you don't really actually understand where that thought is going to take you. That's an interesting problem, but it does happen. So there's a huge need for inner focus in the Two of Swords state. And if you don't, if that focus becomes disrupted, sometimes, you seize onto a thought without really fully understanding what it arose from. And that thought can take you down a road you may wish you had not gone down, right? So that would be our twos. Is this clear? Ask questions if it's not, okay? Because I'm moving at quite a clip, because boy, do we have a lot of these guys. All right, well, we're doing pretty well though. We've gotten through 2 already. We only have 8 to go. All right, let's talk about the 3s. Now I'm going to talk a little bit more about planets as we go. Oh, on the subject of planets, okay. So, and there's stuff in your notes about planets. So we have 7 planets that the ancients knew. And we have the planets on the tree. So we have Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Sun, Venus, Mercury, Moon. Now you may say, where are the other guys? Where's Uranus, Pluto, and Neptune, which are all a part of astrology, right? So what the way we look at that mostly is that those big outer body planets are sort of repetitions of the earlier ones, only on a higher arc. So Venus is all about idealism and is all about beauty and that kind of thing. Neptune, which I can't remember what, oh, it looks like a Poseidon's trine. Yeah, thanks. That's the, what do they call that thing? I forget it. The
Trident.
Trident, thank you. Poseidon's trident. Neptune is very similar to Venus, only way bigger. Neptune, actually, Alan's here. He could probably say this much better than I could. But this is Venus on a higher arc, is what I'm trying to say.
Common idea of it, yeah. Neptune has more aspects of, it's both spirituality and confusion, as well as glamour.
Right. And of course, Venus has those things as well. But the thing about Neptune is it's really easy to get lost in Neptune because it's very dreamy and it's very, very spiritual. Venus is a bit more grounded. And then we have Mars, and Mars is similar to Pluto. Is that right, that glyph?
And in the bottom.
With the L at the bottom.
Thank you.
Just
I'm not so good on my big planets. That's because I don't work with them much. Pluto is, by the way, mythologically Hades, the god of the underworld, and also the god of riches. Now, one of the ways of thinking about Mars is it's that explosive outward force. It's the immune system. It's all of that really deep energy, and it can be very disruptive. Well, so can Pluto. When Pluto erupts out of the unconscious or the underworld, the world of the dead, Pluto brings both riches and wealth and also an awful lot of upset. All you have to do is think about the Persephone story and you've got that one. And that's one of the myths that we'll be working with quite a bit this year. I love that story. So Plutonian force is also very martial, also can be very disruptive, but also brings with it a lot of gold. And so that's a good thing. And then finally we have Uranus, and I can't remember what the heck that one looks like either. That's a really weird one.
Like an H with a cross.
An H with a pendulum coming from the center. Down and a little circle.
Yeah,
Usually considered a higher aspect of Mercury.
exactly. And sometimes this is also associated with this Sephiroth, with Chokmah. Why is that? Because Chokmah is the primordial father, and if you look at the ancient Greek, Uranos or Uranus was the first of the gods. Uranus, the sky, mated with Gaia, the earth, and then produced the generation of Titans, Kronos, Rhea, and then they in turn produced the lesser gods, well, the younger gods, I should say, rather than lesser, which would be Jupiter, Hera, the young gods. So he was the primordial father. So he sometimes is put there. But another way of looking at it is, yes, what Alan was just saying is that Uranus is like Mercury on a higher arc. And so, for example, Aquarians are ruled by Uranus. And they're very heady. It's a very, Uranus is very inventive. It's creativity at a very kind of, but creativity in that sort of technical way.
Computers are Uranian.
Yes, exactly. All right, so that's I just wanted to tell you about those a little bit. All right, so going back to our threes, now we're going to talk about Saturn. Saturn, again, to remind you, Saturn is about physical containment, about structure. Saturn is the teacher, also the taskmaster, also time. His Greek name, by the way, is Kronos. So he's the second god, father god, so to speak. But, there's something sort of monstrous about Saturn, too, and that Saturn can be very devouring energy. Saturn swallowed his children, basically because he was afraid that he was going to be overthrown. So he swallowed them until finally his wife got tired of, this is 5 babies down, and she was really tired of, having these babies that got swallowed. So what she did is she conspired with Gaia, who said, give him a stone, dress it up like a baby, and apparently Saturn was a greedy eater. So what he did is he sort of inhaled the stone, thinking it was the last of his 6 children. And in fact, it was a stone. And the last of the 6 children was Zeus, the god who in fact supplants him. So Zeus went up and grew up, and then there's a whole bunch of other story, and basically ended up giving Saturn the Greek mythic version of Ipecac, and he puked up all the other gods, and that was the end of him, more or less. But anyway, so there's this. I love those stories. They're just great. So Saturn is containment, and it is structure. It's necessary, but it can also feel very confining. And that's an important thing to understand. And when we talk about the Arcana tomorrow, one of the things that we'll be talking about is some of the trumps are attributed to signs of the zodiac. Some of them are attributed to the planets. And some of them are attributed to the 3 higher elements, which would be air, fire, and water. So that's going to be an interesting thing. So it'll be important to remember these planets. And once you know the planets and once you know the elements, it's pretty easy to figure out the signs, right? Because every sign is a fixed element and it has a planetary rulership, right? So let's look at our 3s. First we have 3 of Wands. Now this is fire. How do you think fire is going to feel about being contained? Not so good, right? Now, one of the things that we're going to think about here is, this is, I think, a fair to middling picture. What it's about is this idea of, okay, I've sort of got my creative venture going, but it's still in its formative stage. And what that picture is supposed to be is there's a guy who's sent his ships. You can't see it very well because this is a thumbnail image, but there are little ships out on the ocean that he's looking at. So he's sent his ships out, so to speak, and he doesn't know yet whether or not they're going to make it back. So what this is really about, though, is this notion of, okay, I had this creative impulse. I now have a kind of first sort of plan. I have a basic foundation here, but it's and in order to do that, you have to, bring your creation in. You have to sharpen it, tighten it up, right? And of course, then you have to wait and see. And you have to wait and see. So this is kind of a wait and see card, which is, like I said, can be difficult for fire types. Then we have, but it's also a time of hope. Then we have the 3 of Cups, where we have the 3 graces dancing. Now, remember how we talked about water as being the receptive element, and this is about the experience of love or the experience of relationship, either to oneself or to the other. And here, once again, we have a foundation. I think we talked about this card earlier in the morning fairly well, in which I said, well, this is the stage of the relationship where, you've met, that's your two, and you've had the big initial attraction, and now you're having that brief love fest that occurs in the early stages of the relationship. Tra la 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 la, everything is just swell, right? We haven't figured out yet that we have some issues. And so, of course, this is generally a pretty happy card. Now that's curious because you think again, well, Saturn's sort of heavy. Why would that be? Saturn in water. But actually, water needs containment or it flows away. Relationships need to happen for love to exist. Relationships to ourselves, relationships to other. You need to have a container. Otherwise, it just flows away, right? So that's one reason why this is actually a pretty happy card. Saturn is useful because it's a container. It's containment. It gives form to all those feelings. And so those feelings lead to a relationship, whether it's relationship to other or to oneself.
All the trees are about containment of here?
Saturn, you bet. You bet. Remember how I was talking about how when you get to Binah, certain things have to be cut away, certain things you have to tighten things up, you have to have a container. Otherwise, you still have just this force. This is called the first form, right? So there's our Three of Cups. When we go to the Three of Pentacles, we talked about this card as well as being the journeyman, right? So this is where, the work has taken its form. You haven't yet gone out to bring it out into the world, but you know what it is you're going to be doing, one hopes. That would be the positive. That, okay, I know what I'm going to do now. And then the Three of Swords. And that's the one that looks the worst, but actually, it really isn't. It's just, I think that's an example of where an image is a little bit limiting. Because you look at that and it's hard to see it in a positive light. But in fact, what it's really about is the fact that in order to make a real plan, one does have to contain ideas, discriminate, and choose. Swords, by the way, are about discrimination. Yes?
I really agree with you about the picture not being appropriate, because that's also the card is also Saturn in Libra.
Right.
And in astrology, Saturn is exalted in Libra. It's almost being celebrated. It's like at a party in its own honor.
Right.
Because Saturn likes that Libra balancing kind of energy. So
exactly.
I think that's one
Right.
illustration that's off.
Well, except that sometimes people do experience this card that way.
Yeah, I look at this as like heart mind,
Right.
which is a positive thing.
Yes,
It's
it
like
is.
the union of having your heart and your mind together.
Yes, exactly. But it's also a card about painful lessons. Yes.
How about tough love?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. There's that sense of like, okay now, and in that regard, it reminds me very much of the Queen of Swords. Remember how that's the Queen of Swords, is the absolute ultimate tough love girl.
Yeah.
He's like,
Let the heads roll.
off with your heads. Yeah.
Anyway. Like love triangles.
Yeah, and your little dog too. All right.
Man.
Yeah. I love all those. See, that's a myth. That's a myth. I love the Wizard of Oz. So yeah, so let's look at this card. So there's a positive and there's a negative. In the positive sense, it's like Alan's talking about. There's real stability here. There's a plan that has balance, and it also has it has some real structure, and you really arriving at some hardcore knowledge. Okay, and the negative is, oh, ow. Sometimes it really hurts getting there. Ouch. You have some realizations. Ooh, wow, I didn't think about that. So that's the negative on that one. And then going backwards again, the negative of the Three of Pentacles is, you got to get up and go out and actually do something. Okay, you're a journeyman. So go out now. You've done your master work. Go out and be a master. But one has to actually cross the abyss. You have to jump the abyss into the world of form. And you have to take it out there and do something. So that's a tricky thing sometimes. Because the Three of Pentacles, because it is Saturn and because we are in this suit of Earth, it can either be having a really firm grounding or it can be hanging on a little, for that safety. The Three of Wands, again, I think the negative on that one is the impatience. That sometimes, and the difficulty with constraining action to the plan. There's that tendency to want to leap out and over. And then finally, the Three of Cups, again, we talked about that, where you can just kind of get lost in, the happy la 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 moment. And not see what's coming down, coming forward. Let's look at fours. So the fours, Jupiter. What about Jupiter? Jupiter is expansion. Jupiter is the king of the gods, Zeus, the youngest god, the thunderer, the sky father. And Jupiterian force is very strong. It's very charismatic. But it's all about creating and building up. It's in one way you can think about it as a civilizing force. And one of the things that's interesting when you look at the Greek myths in particular, what you see about Zeus is that he sort of gets all the various warring parties settled down. He gets the Titans under control. He gets the various monsters under control. He actually, unlike Kronos, he does not kill his own father. He realizes he doesn't need to kill him. He just needs to win, which he does. And so that's an interesting thing. It's a civilizing force. It's the force of rule and order and that sort of thing. It's also lucky, often. There's a lot of good luck involved with Jupiter. So looking at the fours, the Four of Wands, there's our good luck aspect, all right. When you combine Jupiter and fire and activity, what you get is, this is a nice, happy combination, isn't it? Because you have all that creativity and activity that is happening in an orderly way. And so the symbol for this card is festival. So you see, people in the festival field. And there's a sense of very harmonious, joyful activity. Everything's moving forward smoothly. We don't have a lot of dissent or grumbling. And there's this. So when this card shows up, that's a pretty happy card. It's a really happy card. When we get down to the Four of Cups, however, it's kind of a little not so happy. And part of the reason there is, moving into the realm of experience and going back to our earlier metaphor, which I thought was kind of fun. So you start off with the impulse to get in a relationship, and then you move into the threes, and now you're in love, and now you move in, you're on the fours, and now you've moved in together, and you discover that, all the things that you really don't like about this person. And, but what it's really about is, it's just the difficulty with enough being enough. Think about Jupiter as this expansive force, and think about the way that, when you finally get in a relationship, and now you have a routine, and it has a certain order, then you start to think about the stuff that isn't in that relationship. And oh gosh, I wonder, and that's where it's easy to get into the grass is always greener on the other side of the fence. Or, if I settle down with this guy, then I can't have that thing that I could have if I was with that guy. But unless, of course, you want to be polygamous, it's sort of a moot point. So it's that kind of dissatisfaction that can happen from not wanting to have limits. Not wanting to have limits and needing to have limits. And so experiencing the normal order, the normal structures of life as a constraint. Right? So that can be a difficulty. On the other hand, on the positive side, one of the ways that this card can function is it's a pause in action where one takes stock. You say, okay, so now we're living together. How's it going? Is this a good thing? How could I make it better? What do I need to work on? So there is that aspect.
Which, I'm sorry, this was air?
No, I'm looking at Four of Cups. Still looking at Four of Cups. So there again, the image is a good one for the negative, not so good for the positive. But you can think about it as it's a time when you have to contemplate the good, the bad, the absurd, the indifferent, and look at the structure. How does it work? Is it sustainable? Does it sustain you? The Four of Pentacles, look at that guy. That's a great image. That's really funny. So now we have that Jupiterian urge to accumulate and Earth. So on the one hand, on a positive note, this card does indicate generally wealth, right? So if somebody's worried about whether or not that new job is going to work out and that they're going to make enough money and, you know, let's say you're going to be a salesperson, am I going to be able to succeed at it? And that card comes up, hey, that's nice, right? You bet, plenty of money coming in. On the other hand, it can also represent an unhealthy accumulation, holding on, too much stuff. So there you have it. And then let's look down at the Four of Swords. Now the Four of Swords, this is interesting. So air likes to move, and it moves a lot. And then now it's encountering, you know, that ordering and structuring of mind. So you can think about order and structure of mind. And what always comes to me is meditation. And actually the iconography of this card, as I understand it, is often, it's supposed to be about the period of time during which young squires, prior to their being knighted, would spend a night alone in a chapel in a state of meditation. And so it sort of implies the state of quietude, of quieting the mind in order to actually bring into being more order, more knowledge in a sense, calmer thoughts. The negative of this card, however, could also be, you know, where one falls into an unconsciousness. And that's an interesting combination. When you think about Jupiter as being very expansive, it is very ordering, but it also can be kind of mindless. You know, you just keep on keeping on, and that is actually a kind of unconsciousness where the mind has fallen asleep. That's the negative of that card. It took me a long time to understand that.
It's almost like too much Pisces or something.
Yeah, well, Pisces is about feeling, but it's about, oh, I'm trying to think, it's like an ant-like mentality, you know, where, you know, I'm thinking of, oh gosh, the Sword and the Stone. When Wart has to become various creatures, and Merlin turns him into an ant. And the problem is the ants are just like really busy, and there's these little voices in their head going, do this, do that, and they're just like, dum, 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 dum. But there's not much consciousness in it, you know. And another way of looking at it is monkey mind, interestingly enough, although that's a little hard to get from this image because the image is one of stillness. But that's where, again, where I say don't let the image limit you. Remember, Jupiter, expansion and always being moving. You can make yourself so busy that you don't really think. And that's a potential I see in the Four of Swords. And probably the reason why it took me a long time to understand that one is because it's something I do. It's horrifying, you know, the way we can just block ourselves. Did we talk about a negative for the Four of Wands? I don't think we did.
No.
So what would be negative about the Four of Wands? Well, one of the things, there again, this is about joyous creation. And, but there again, I think there can be a lack of thought in that. There's a way where it can be, okay, this isn't, what am I trying to say? What I'm trying to talk about is when people get into that celebratory mode, or we've got a great thing going, and then it takes on a kind of a movement of its own, where all critical thinking really kind of stops. People get swept away by enthusiasm. And again, it's by that wave of expansionist energy. And so you just kind of get swept away. Again, not likely that you're going to see a negative on that card, but it can happen. It sort of depends on what's around it. Especially if you have a lot of these kinds of cards around it that indicate, things moving fast. That might be a concern, right? Does that make sense? All right, so we got our 4s. We're really moving along here. All right. Now let's look at 5s, the difficult 5s. Okay, 5s, this is Gebera. It's that revolutionary force, that energy that breaks up stasis. Martian energy is often talked about as being warlike. I think a better term would be confrontational. So the 5s involve confrontation, whether it's we're being confronted by others, being confronted by life, being confronted by our own uncomfortable feelings, but it's a kind of a confrontation. But here's the other thing that you have to remember about Mars, is it's a confrontation that leads to activity and vitality. So Martian energy is particularly needed when we become devitalized, too stuck, when things aren't moving enough, when we're static in our vision. And the 5s tend to come up that indicate that we're in a period where whatever stasis we've been sitting in is finally being kind of shaken up. And so even though the 5s always look alarming, I think they're really, I like them. But maybe that's me. So let's look at them. All right, let's look at the 5 of Wands. Well, the 5 of Wands is kind of funny. So what happens when you combine fire, which is this active creative energy, and you combine it with this kind of Martian confrontational energy? Well, it just means that there's just a lot of chaos. And it isn't even necessarily that people are fighting, although people look at that image and that's what they immediately think of. Oh yeah, everybody's duking it out. But it really isn't about that. It's more just that there are so many things happening at once that one has a hard time seeing the forest for the trees. So the difficulty here is too many things happening. And one is no longer able to kind of coherently think about what you're doing. And that's interesting if you think about the 4 of Wands, right? Because let's look at that progression for a minute. So in the 4 of Wands, we have la 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 la. This is great. This is really harmonious. Everybody's on board. We're moving. We're expanding. The moment is being driven forward. And then it reaches a certain speed where we kind of lose the grip of what our original vision was, because too much is happening and we can't pay attention to it all. So the pace of things has exceeded our ability to stay in touch with our essential inner vision, our original impulse to create. And that's a difficulty. Yeah. Well, what's positive about it is that in a lot of that creative confusion, with lots of stuff happening, usually what happens is there's just a lot of new probabilities and possibilities get generated. And so if one can write it out then it's gonna be, and what I always say to people when this card comes up and I wanna read it in a positive way, is I'll say, right now, it's probably pretty hard for you to sort out what the heck you're doing, cause you've just got so many things going on, and it's a wild ride. But just try to stay as calm as you can, because when the dust settles, and let the dust settle. When the dust settles, then you're gonna have a clearer sense of what's up. But right now is not a time, and so this is one of those cards that comes up when you're actually in your, advice giving role, which actually is an important part of doing tarot. And so often when I'll say to people when the Five of Wands is up, it's like, look, don't make any big decisions right now. Not the time to do that. Too much happening. Let the dust settle, then make a decision. And if you can, try to slow the pace down, right? So that's a positive and it's negative. And I think that's true with all of the fives. They're always kind of simultaneously positive and negative. They may feel uncomfortable, but they're almost always good for us. That's fun, my take.
I consider them sort of a mid-course correction.
Yes.
While it's difficult to do, it is a correction.
Well, that's exactly right. Earlier we were using a metaphor of orchards, and I was talking about this is pruning.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah. Or a thinning is another way of looking at it. So you got a bunch of plants, and then at some point, often you have to thin. You have to get some of the seedlings out so that the other ones have room to grow, and there's all that. So gardening metaphors tend to come easily to me. All right, let's go to the Five of Pentacles. Oh, that's a beast. Nobody likes this card. Why do we not like that card? Well, nobody likes to see their home life and their finances messed with. Let's face it. That is not a thing that most of us are very happy to see up in the air. But what's interesting is, I kind of like the image on this card, even though the further you get down the tree, the worse the images are, in my opinion. But what I will say about this image is, if you look at it closely, and it's hard because it's a thumbnail, is you have two people sort of hobbling along in the snow outside this wonderful door, and this always makes me think of what's that dreadful story that we used to tell children? Oh, about the little match girl. Who thought that was a children's story? Oh, this little girl freezes to death on the doorstep watching the family inside eating roast goose. Oh, I hated that story. Anyway, so this is sort of like the little match girl, there you are, hobbling through the snow, feeling shut outside, out in the cold, not having enough. This is the card is the epitome of the anti-abundance frame of mind. I don't have enough, oh my God, I'm gonna go broke. We've all been in a massive cultural Five of Pentacles for about the last year and a half, wouldn't you say?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, and that's a great example. This whole economic recession, that's this card. Now, that's the downside. Oh boy, you're really scared and you really feel like you don't have enough. But actually, and there's this kind of sense of being crippled, of not having the resources, not having shoes, being wounded. There's all of that. And that's the downside. But really, the positive side is the wealth is there. It is there. It's there, right there behind that window. And you sort of see that the beggars aren't even looking at it. They're just sort of like oblivious. And so part of what this is about is not so much real poverty, it's the fear of poverty. And you have to remember too that the fives it's a phase, it's a transition. This is not like, okay, now I'm sunk. This is, I'm going through a rough patch. And so the positive of this card is really, again, if you're gonna give people advice on this one, it's kind of like, you're gonna feel like you're going down, but this is just a passing phase. It's a time of reorganization. And I think that that's even true with this ghastly period that we've all been going through. I mean, it really looks ugly, but I think it was terribly necessary. You know, the economy that we were running in this world is so crazy, and it was so inflated, and it was such a bubble, that this is actually a very useful period. As hard as it is, as scary as it's been, I think it's a period of really having to come to earth so that we can actually begin to access our real strength. And that's the thing that you have to remember about the fives, is if you can get past the sense of disorder, there's real strength there. This is Mars. So it's about a reordering. And out of that reordering comes a newer, stronger, leaner, more vital self. Important, very important. Then we go on to the Five of Cups. The Five of Cups. Okay, so what do we have there? We have a figure standing there with 3 spilled cups, brooding on the shores of the great ocean, with 2 full cups behind him. And what this is about is, okay, so, you know, now my great love, or whatever it is, has suffered some disappointments. So now I'm feeling like, oh boy, you know, this relationship isn't working out, my new reinvented self isn't working out, whether it's the relationship to oneself and so there's this sense of sadness and desolation. However, I think that this is a great icon, because the iconography of the card tells you that you can focus on the spilled cups, or you can focus on the 2 left behind. And that what you have to do a lot of times is you have to go through that sense of loss in order to really arrive at what's really there. So it's the half full, half empty metaphor. So nobody likes emotional disruption, but it deepens us. And I think it's interesting too, because remember, if you start at the beginning of the suit, what do you start with? 2 cups. You know, and it isn't, and that's significant. It isn't a man and a woman reaching out to hold a cup together. It's 2 cups. It's about the relationship of oneself to the other, or oneself to oneself, right? So what do we have here? Well, all that extraneous stuff, all that extraneous emotion has been stripped away, and what's left? 2 cups. It's important. I think that's a good icon, that one. I really like that one. So this is about, you know, the disappointment of emotional loss, that sense of, oh, but that when one gets through it, there is again a deepening sense of what it is that's really important. And the good news about the 5s is after the 5s come the 6s. Right? So that's an important thing. But I love this card. I love that card. I mean, I don't love it when it shows up in my life, but. And then we have the 5 of Swords. This is an interesting one. What you see is a guy who is one. He's standing on a field, and everybody else is throwing down their swords and going away. So he's one. But he doesn't look too happy, and the sky doesn't look too great either. And this is about, one of the things that this card is about is what's called a Pyrrhic victory. It's like you won the victory, but you know, it's turned to ashes. And what that's about is the way that, once again, with our ideas, that we reach a point where they don't work anymore, and we often try to hang on to them. And the more we hang on to them, the worse we feel. And the more we can't let go of that old dead idea, that old dead system, the worse we feel. And it's only when we surrender, when we, in a sense, be the other figures in that card, and we walk away from the field, when we give it up, that our mind is freed from its constraints. So the positive of this card is like, okay, you've hit a dead end. Now, if you can let go and allow yourself to flow again, then the next step will arise. But the negative is that it's really a struggle to let go. And one of the things that I often think about this card is, it often comes up, even though swords are really about the mind, it often comes up in relationships where you have a parent, or you have a half of a couple, where you have some idea and you just can't let it go, and you're actually killing the relationship because of it. Because you just can't let it go. Parents do that a lot. It's really sad, because then what happens is they lose their children. And that's how that there you can do that. You get in an argument and you win the argument, but you really lost. It's like being right to the point where you just made yourself so right that you no longer are in that relationship. Yeah, that would be the 5 of Swords.
How many is he holding? I can't see. Is it 3 and then 2 are on the ground?
He's got 2 in his hands and 3 are in the ground. No, he has 2 in one hand and 1 in the other. Yeah, and then there are 2 on the ground. So, there's that sense of, that is where the mind has become self-defeating, because it's too rigid and it has to break up, and it's that the pain of that struggle is what's reflected in this particular card. Yeah.
Would the 3 in his hand kind of represent that containment of Saturn that was up there on the 2? And then
Yes.
And then the 2 represent the relationship between the other people, sort of?
Yeah, or himself and those
Yeah,
people,
yeah,
or
himself.
himself and his ideas. Right, exactly. Because 2 is always about, yeah. So it might be your relationship to your idea, and then there's that Saturn.
Right. And the 2 being also like a opposition.
Yes.
Then in astrology, where it's different, but the resolution is when they come together.
Yes. Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Absolutely. And that's what 3s are all about.
And the 3 is square, possibly?
Yes. Yes. Yeah, so I think part of what's going on, yeah, that's an interesting thought. Hi, Tom.
I kind of look at it as he's got 2 in one hand, 1 in the other hand, so it's like he's really not able to let go of the first stage of the tree of life and the second one. He's just so, and then just not being able to let go of that first idea.
Right. And then, or it's that stranglehold grip, and actually he's reaching a point where even if he gathers up all the swords, what's he gonna do with them?
Almost like he's holding on to too many ideas. Too.
Well, exactly. And you know what? Look at, where is it? Yeah. Oh no, that's not it. Well, it goes on there, but you know what it reminds me of is, this, I'm gonna jump for a second. Go to the 10 of Wands. Huh. Now, if you turn those wands into swords, that's where that guy's headed. Where his idea has become, his inflexibility has become a burden. So that's, I think, part of what that's about. It's where the idea, it's the tyranny of the idea. It's where thought is supposed to flow, So in some ways, what's interesting about the 5 of Swords is, things breaking up shouldn't be so hard, except it is, except it isn't. In other words, when we get attached to our ideas, that in it of itself an opposition, because ideas need to be constantly changing and constantly growing. And so when we get fixated, we're actually working against air. And what the 5s are all about is breaking up that fixation. So when we finally do let go, oh, what a relief.